This is the image that is currently being used to describe the UK economy. It features Prime Minister Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in a sinking boat called Great Britain. But why is that? Don't swipe or click away, because here is why the UK economy is collapsing. First of all, we should look at how the country has been managing the global economic crisis and what will happen to the West in times like these. Next up, we will try to figure out how this will affect you and those closest to you. So, first of all, let's look at the UK inflation chart. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, has jumped up from 0 to an unprecedented 9.15 in May of 2022. But this is not the worst part. The worst part is that back then, they predicted the inflation rate to go up and reach 11% by October. It turns out, they were right. Never before have British taxpayers had to shell out 2,800 British pounds annually for their gas and electric bills. They think that this unwanted growth in prices will ease next year. But those forecasts depend solely on the war in Ukraine ending. If it doesn't, then the UK economy could see a significant shift in their economy. Next up, we have to talk about the exchange rate. If we go a few years back, we will notice that for 1 British pound, you could get approximately $2. Today, go to any bank and try to exchange your 10 British pounds for US dollars, and you won't receive $20. You will only get $11. But why does this matter to you? Well, since the UK economy is the 5th largest in the world, a lot of US companies are selling goods to the UK. So let's assume that someone from the UK decides to smash that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, let's say he decides to buy a Tesla. They would have to spend around £40,490. If this was 2007, those 40,000 pounds would be turned into 80,000 US dollars. Today, those 40,000 British pounds would be turned into 44,000 US dollars. Just like that, $36,000 have been wiped out from the economy. This leaves less money for corporations, which means less money for the government and less money for programs like healthcare, Social Security, and education. Needless to say, this is a big deal. If we look at the country's GDP, we would see more alarming figures. For example, back in 2020, the UK economy was down by 10% due to the global pandemic. However, it didn't take long and the country bounced back up to about 5% or 6% GDP growth in 2021. Since 2021, the economy kept tanking. And now, in May of 2022, the UK government saw its 3rd consecutive month of contraction. Compared to November of 2019, the UK economy is only 0.9% bigger. Those are abysmal numbers. And of course, since the UK imports most of its oil and gas from Russia and half of its food supply from foreign countries, this means that they are especially vulnerable when it comes to global economic downturns, and the employment rate is in no better condition. Compared to 2019, the UK workforce is smaller by 1.2 million workers. Part of this is due to the pandemic, and another part is due to Brexit. So here, the political crisis in the country is also responsible. During the pandemic, the students got back to their classrooms since they couldn't work part-time. Many of the older working population took an early retirement. Even after the pandemic was over and some of the students were back in the labor market, economists could see that the UK had suffered a permanent drop. Brexit worsened the entire situation by reducing the number of workers from poor EU countries that came to the UK seeking employment. We can't forget about the tax burden on the UK economy either. It seems that the new MP will have to reverse back to the tax plan proposed by the Johnson administration. They proposed increasing the taxes on businesses and households if the government wants to have money to pay for all the spending during the pandemic. But instead of paying off some of the debt, the new MP is proposing an increase in the defense budget as the imminent threat from Russia threatens the EU continent with every passing day. The government is struggling to make ends meet as it is, and they need to find a way to pay more for pensions as more and more people are retiring. So it's likely that the Exchequer will have to find more extra cash, and if they can't get it from taxes or loans, they will likely get it from the printing press. But what if the UK finds the money from exports? If they produce more goods and services they can export, maybe they will be able to find the cash the government needs. Well, UK exports have been in a slump since the start of the pandemic. In the latest assessment of the Institute of Export and International Trade, they reported that the UK is down by 2% from the previous month. Businesses are struggling with all of the supply chain problems, Brexit, and the conflict in Ukraine. So let's see here. The UK is facing sky-high inflation. The British pound is at the brink of collapse, and they are facing problems with exports and production thanks to Europe's energy crisis. Top economist Mohammed El-Iran says that a UK recession is inevitable. The only question that remains to be answered is its depth and duration. As you can see, the UK is not in a good position. It's not like they're the only country in the European continent that's facing problems like these. But it seems like the problems in the UK are aggravated beyond belief, and all of this is worsened by the policies enacted by Liz Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng. For example, near the end of September, the Bank of England raised interest rates by 0.5%. They believed this would aid in solving the problem of inflation. But it had the opposite effect. Not one day later, the British Prime Minister announced another wave of tax cuts, the size of which has not been seen in the UK in the past 50 years. The administration is aiming for economic growth, but that still doesn't solve the government's funding problem. Investors who would usually invest in the UK began to lose their trust. This caused the country's bond prices to collapse. As a result, the cost of borrowing money went through the roof. The mortgage market is in chaos, and the country's pension funds are almost insolvent. Since no foreign investors wanted to buy their bonds, the Bank of England, the country's national bank, resorted to a dire measure. They announced they would be buying their own government bonds with money that they are going to print. Between the end of September and October 14th, the Bank of England is supposed to print 65 billion British pounds, and for a minute there, it seemed like everything was under control. Bond prices were back up. The pound started to rise when compared to the dollar. But this was only temporary. The measure only stopped the bleeding. It didn't heal the wound. In a very short time, the UK found itself in the same position. Now, the only thing left for them to do seems to be to balance the books. To achieve this, the government would need to decrease spending. But we all know that's easier said than done, especially when the UK is just about to enter a recession. On top of that, the many strikes organized by the UK working class citizens over their low wages show us that this will be nearly impossible to pull off. And while the Bank of England is trying to stop the price increases, Liz Truss and the governments are trying to promote economic growth. In the months to come, they will need to work together if UK is to survive this crisis. On a related note, do you think that the UK can withstand all of the economic and political pressures it's facing? You can tell us in the comment section below. If you'd like more videos like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of them. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.